Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with X History. Today we got a little extra from the whole, Potsy conspiracy. The Bonfire of the Vanities. Apparently this is supposed to be the symbol of the Medici and Florence fall. Don't know what happened, but I guess we'll learn more once we get in there. So let's learn more about this bonfire and see what it symbolizes. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Florence, February 7th, 1497.
That old, huh?
Fire alights the Piazza della Signoria as young men throw objects into it, stoking the flames even higher. Every year at this time, Florence celebrates Carnival, a drunken blowout before Lent with masks, indulgences, and bonfires. But this year is different. This enormous pyre is not celebrating excess, but rather the death of it. The men heave more objects onto the fire. A painting depicting a nude woman, a box of cosmetics, a deck of playing cards, wigs, secular music sheets, books of love poetry, mirrors, sculpture, musical instruments, and carnival masks. Anything that would tempt the city to sin or decadence. A bonfire of the vanities. But what could possibly possess the center of the Renaissance, a city of art and architecture, a place of learning, to literally burn its cultural achievements? That would be Girolamo Savonarola, the Mad Monk of Florence.
Monk of Florence. Wasn't he like in the,
And if you're fired up after burning through this episode, you can watch Ep 1 of our new series on the unholy Roman Emperor Frederick II right now, 2 whole weeks
Jack
early
Rackham has a video on that guy.
New Year's resolution achieved. In 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici is no longer the young, vital man he had been at the time of the Potsy conspiracy. Now he is 43, and prematurely aged through an unknown condition. His title, the Magnificent, seems a mockery now. Several branches of the Medici Bank have failed, the family's finances in turmoil. In the streets, people call him tyrant, despite the enormous amounts the family has paid to erect buildings, pay taxes, and sponsor great works of art. Yet, as
public opinion can change in an instant.
It is his rival, the preacher Savonarola, one of the
AKA
men
the
who
bad
calls
monks,
him tyrant, who comes to see him. There, Savonarola curses Lorenzo on his deathbed, condemning his soul to hell. Except this is a myth, invented because the reality that Savonarola appears to have made an uneventful visit before Lorenzo died peacefully is just sort of like maddeningly anticlimactic. Because let's be clear, these two had a history, and the moment of Lorenzo's death would mark a major transition for the city. So it just sort of feels like a shift of that magnitude should have involved a dramatic confrontation. But in truth, there was no need, because
history's often very boring.
Had to do was wait. But backing up a bit, Savonarola had been born to a medical family and had pursued a career as a doctor before becoming a Dominican monk. Yet even there, he found monastic life still not morally stringent enough. He became a firebrand, an itinerant preacher, writing apocalyptic poetry and speaking against what he perceived as a church steeped in corruption and avarice.
Hence Mad Monk.
An approach that attracted both followers and enemies. These oratories brought him to Lorenzo's attention in 1490, when a controversial philosopher he was sheltering suggested Savonarola would be an asset to the Medici-sponsored convent of San Marco. Yet, despite moving to Florence, under Lorenzo's protection, it was very clear that Savonarola had no love for the Medici. In his preachings, he decried the city's wealth and splendor, rallying against the ruling class of Florence. They were exploitative tyrants, he said, that spent vast sums on palaces, artwork, clothes, and carnivals, while the ordinary people of Florence starved. They were idolatrous sinners, glorying in the pagan culture of ancient Greece and Rome, commissioning nude images of biblical figures, and the Virgin Mary dressed in modern silks like a courtesan. Florence must repent, he said, and cleanse itself before God scourged the city. Though he was careful to never mention their name, it was clear that Savonarola was preaching against the Medici and their abominable Renaissance. Yet Lorenzo still allowed him to preach, probably because Savonarola was slamming the corruption of the church and papacy even harder than the Medici. But this...
Yeah, that does sound like a double-edged sword, because he's still calling you out, but also targeting your enemies, so what are you gonna do? I mean, you can't really stop him for what he's saying, because, frankly, they're still going to think you're an evil guy. Like, no matter what you do, either you let him talk, or just basically let him. I don't know. You're kind of stuck, aren't you? Yeesh. Even I don't know what I would have done in that situation. Let me know what you guys would have done. Would you let him just keep talking, or just kick him out of the city? I don't know. Anyway.
tolerance was a critical error, because with Lorenzo's death, Savonarola would make his move. Lorenzo's successor was his son
Pietro the
Piero,
Unfortunate.
nicknamed the Unfortunate. Why? Well, because the Medici Bank was in shambles and the population was turning against the family. Meanwhile,
right.
the ranks of Savonarola's fanatical disciples, nicknamed the Weepers, swelled until they were a force on the streets. He now shouted prophecy, saying a great king would come from the north and bring reformation to the church. And hearing him, other holy men and women began reporting similar visions. And those visions were vindicated in 1494, when French King Charles VIII crossed the Alps and stormed down the peninsula to assert his right to the throne of Naples. But while the masses
during the War of the Bucket,
some
or
did whisper that this was hardly a prophecy, because, like, everyone knew Charles was intending to invade, so I guess. Piero the Unfortunate
they usually
quickly
just
buckled
listen
to
to
Charles's demands, and this moment of weakness was the opening so many in Florence had waited for. In November, the population, whipped up by Savonarola and tired of Medici rule, rose up and expelled the Medici family. Nominally, this uprising did restore the Republic, but it was not exactly the Republic that had existed before the Medici became its shadow rulers, because, now Savonarola was its shadow ruler. In fact, when Florence needed a leadership figure to meet King Charles and convince him to pull back the troops he'd moved into Florence, it was Savonarola. And he succeeded, though not in convincing Charles that his role was to remove the Pope. See, Savonarola wasn't interested in just having a republic, but a revolutionary theocratic republic. Upon negotiating French exit from Florence, he declared that the city would be richer, more powerful, and glorious, that it was the navel of Italy, and would spread the reformation of the church throughout the peninsula. Meanwhile, Republican revolutionaries stripped Medici symbols from Florence, including destroying Botticelli's fresco of the Pazzi conspirators. Increasingly, Savonarola began speaking more explicitly about prophecy. He claimed to have predicted the deaths of Lorenzo and Pope Innocent VII, as well as the French invasion, and described intricate visions of ascending to heaven and speaking to the Virgin Mary about Florence becoming the New Jerusalem. These visions led to a wave of political and social reforms in Florence, reorganizing its government and senate to be more reliant on artisans rather than the bankers and nobles of the Medici era. But the city also passed laws against homosexuality and immodest dress, with gangs of Savonarola followers patrolling the streets to measure necklines and dress lengths. At first,
they got a fashion police.
The famously corrupt Alexander VI just sort of let it slide. After all, he was more of a political animal than a spiritual leader, But when Florence refused to join a league against France, Alexander barred Savonarola from preaching and summoned him to Rome. Savonarola abided by the injunction for a few months, though he continued to quietly rule the city. And behind the scenes, the ironies now surrounding Savonarola's victory continued to stack up. Not only was he now the shadow ruler of Florence like the Medici before him, now he was also battling a pope like the Medici before him. More than that, he was also now steering the city's artistic taste. Granted in a different direction by banning secular art, but encouraging religious art. Yet Savonarola wasn't the type to stay quiet for long. And soon, he was again calling the church a whore and rallying against Alexander directly. He also began to remake the city's carnival celebration into, well, what we saw at the beginning of this episode.
The Vanities.
The first of these was known as a Bonfire of the Vanities, a practice that had been around for decades, where a large bonfire was built at the center of a city and sinful objects burned. At the top of the pile, a wooden figure meant to represent Carnival itself. These events also involved parades, songs, and religious theater. This was finally too much for Alexander, and he excommunicated Savonarola shortly after the first bonfire. Yet he did manage to hold on to power long enough to have a second bonfire the next year, but by that time, much as the public had become fatigued with Medici Renaissance excess, public sentiment was also starting to curdle on Savonarola's anti-Renaissance backlash. Then when he was confronted by city leaders, Savonarola was convinced to retreat to his convent. His popularity fading, he did make one last grab for relevancy, claiming that he could perform miracles. But this backfired when a rival Franciscan friar challenged him to prove it in a trial by fire, with the two walking into a bonfire to see who God would protect. Savonarola declined, worrying that he just wasn't safe outside the convent, but a supporter did accept on his behalf.
Yep.
On the appointed
And
day,
here we go.
Savonarola's representative met the challenger in front of a roaring bonfire, watched by much of the city wanting to witness a miracle.
This ain't gonna end well.
Ready to vindicate or condemn Savonarola, faced off. Then proceeded to argue for hours about the rules of a trial by fire. Like, how's it actually gonna work? Like, how far do we have to go in?
Guys, your bonfire?
Which God are we talking about? Like, really, though? Not that one. But regardless, they argued for so long that a rainstorm rolled in and doused the flames. The mob, interpreting the rain as an omen against Savonarola, and angered that he did not appear himself, besieged his convent and forced him, along with his 2 closest followers, out. Arrested and tortured, Savonarola would admit to government interrogators that he'd invented his visions, then recanted that confession, then confessed under torture again. In prison, he wrote, penning some of the works which would later make him a luminary for later Protestant reformers. Eventually, his captors led Savonarola and his 2 disciples to the same place where he'd burned symbols of the Renaissance. And they declared the 3 heretics, tore away their Dominican robes, hung them, and burned their bodies. Savonarola's final bonfire of the Vanities.
Yep.
And now that the smoke has cleared on...
Wow. That happened. Honestly, I'm not even sure how to feel about that. What do you guys think? I don't know. Well, that's it for the Vanities. And, well, bots and stuff. You can see Frederick II, aka the Antichrist. Not kidding, look it up. That's what they called him. Anyway, so, a lot. I'll see you guys then. Till then, see ya!